Here we are already in the third week of our Lenten journey. Last week we talked about gift wrapping. We heard Jesus say no to bread, to proof, to kingdoms. Not because they were wrong, but because the terms were. And then on Sunday we went up a mountain and we learned something harder than saying no to a bad deal. We learned what to do when the glory is real, but we still can't keep it. This week I'd like to start in Ecclesiastes. We're in chapter 3, verses 1 through 15. I'm going to read the whole thing. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather them together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. Now, we've heard that first part before. A time to be born, a time to die. It shows up in sympathy cards and folk songs and cross-stitch patterns. I'm going to say something surprising. I don't think this list is comforting. I think it's devastating. I think it's radical, even. Because what the preacher is saying is, we don't get a vote. The seasons change without our permission. There is a time to plan and a time to uproot. But we don't get to decide which one we're in. That's not a greeting card. That's a reckoning. I think I knew this when my boys were small. Remember those long nights, the ones where you're up at midnight and then 2 and then 4, and their precious little bodies are snuggled so close you can feel their heartbeat through their shirts? I am truly grateful for every single one of those quiet moments. Every one. The weight of a sleeping child is the holiest thing I have ever held. But even then, even in the middle of it, I knew it was going to pass. I couldn't keep them small. The season was already turning while I was still inside it. But here's the part I didn't expect. I looked forward to the next thing, even as I was loving the thing that I had. Not because the moment wasn't enough. I think it was because I trusted the next one would be given too. And that's radical acceptance. Not letting go of the gift, but holding it open-handed while it's still in your palm. I think that's what verse 11 tells us. And this is a verse I want to sit inside for a minute. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. God put eternity in our hearts. That's why we ache. That's why nothing under the sun quite satisfies. We were built with a homing signal for something permanent, and we live in a world where everything has a season. We can feel forever, but we can't hold it. So let's lay this beside Sunday's gospel. This is from Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 9. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah." He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Rise and do not be afraid." And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." Holy, imagine what that looked like. Your rabbi, the one you've been walking dusty roads with, eating fish with, arguing with, suddenly his face is the sun. His clothes go white, not white like linen, white like light. And standing next to him, Moses, Elijah, the law, and the prophets in the flesh, having a conversation like old friends. You can't breathe. You can't look away. Every story you were raised on is standing 10 feet from you, shining. Of course, Peter reached for a hammer. What else do you do when your whole body is saying, this is it, this is everything, stay here, stay here, stay. Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents. He's not wrong. It is good. What he's seeing is magnificent. He's not even being selfish. He offers to build the tents himself. That's humility, that's service. He's just gripping. And God doesn't even let him finish. While he was still speaking, I love that detail. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadows them, and a voice says, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." Not build for him. Listen. And then they're terrified. Of course they are. And Jesus does the most tender thing. He comes to them, he touches them, and he says, "Rise and do not be afraid." And when they look up, they see no one but Jesus. Their Jesus. A while back, I was in San Francisco, and I had the opportunity to walk through the Walt Disney Family Museum, mostly alone, which in hindsight was exactly right. Some revelations need solitude the way fire needs air. And there it was, the origin story. Walt Disney sitting on a park bench, watching his daughters play on a carousel and thinking, there should be a place where parents and children can play together. That's it. That was a dream. A father watching his kids spin in circles, wishing he could climb on too. That impulse is truly beautiful. It's holy. And then you walk through the rest of the museum. You watch the dream pick up speed. The fairy tales arrive. But the girls in them get waistlines you could wrap one hand around and feet so tiny they'd snap on cobblestone. Mary Poppins gets captured. Pooh Bear gets a scooter. Eeyore breakdances. Still, I cried in the final room. All the magazine covers, the legacy, glossy and enormous. The grief of the world. And listen, neither Peter nor Walt were wrong. It just doesn't work. You can't tent the glory. You can't franchise the forest. A few years before that, I was in England walking through the actual countryside that inspired A.A. Milne's 100-Acre Wood. Pooh Bear. It was the real woods, Ashton Forest in Sussex, the one Milne's son Christopher Robin actually walked. I was wearing sandals, completely inappropriate sandals. The weather didn't care. The sheep didn't care. The stiles, those little fence crossings the English put everywhere because apparently gates are too easy, those stiles didn't care. I remember crawling under one, and somewhere in the mud and the wool smell and the absolute refusal of the English countryside to cooperate with my shoe choices, I started chanting to myself, I love sidewalks, I love Disney, I love sidewalks, I love Disney. This became my mother-in-law's favorite story of the trip. I said it over and over like a prayer of surrender, because the real 100-acre wood is not a brand. It's mud and sheep and weather you weren't dressed for. The real forest has no gift shop, just wooden signposts and footpaths and the quiet, stubborn beauty of a place that has literally outlasted everything anyone has tried to build on top of it. Disney took that forest and gave it walls. They pulled Pooh out of the actual dirt and gave him a franchise. And the forest is still there, the stiles are still there, the sheep are still there. The mud doesn't know it's famous. And maybe that's the whole thing. Peter saw glory and reached for a hammer. Walt saw his daughters and reached for a blueprint. I saw the most beautiful forest I'd ever crawled through and reached for a sidewalk. We grip because we saw something real. The seeing was real. That's the part that matters. Peter didn't hallucinate the Transfiguration. Walt didn't imagine his daughters on that carousel. I was actually in the mud. The glory happened. We were there. The joy isn't in the keeping. The joy is in the witness. Jesus touched them and said, "Rise, do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one but Jesus. The tents were never built. The glory didn't leave. It just wasn't living in Peter's architecture. It never was. The vapor is ours, but the permanence is his. And somehow that's not a punishment, it's a gift. And I'm going to leave this little sidebar note in here. Peter really wanted to build 3 tents on the mountaintop. I constantly am trying to build 13 tents. Some of us just overbuild when we're scared. And here's where I'll leave you this week. What are you trying to keep that was only ever passing through? What would it look like to stand in the middle of something beautiful and just be in it? Without housing it, without branding it, without making it stay? Peter looked up after the cloud lifted and saw no one but his Jesus. Nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Everything under the sun is vapor. But remember, the word is not under the sun. We'll keep walking, and while we do, I encourage you to be brilliant. Let your light shine everywhere you go. This is Everything Under the Sun, a Lenten journey through Ecclesiastes. I'm Carrie Kunkel. Stay close.